Ladies and gentlemen, today I speak on a place that has become emblematic of modern punishment and controversy, the CECOT Prison in El Salvador, officially known as the Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo. Built in the midst of a brutal state of emergency against gang violence, CECOT stands as one of the largest, most secure, and most debated correctional facilities in the world. The Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, CECOT, commonly known as CECOT Prison, is a state-of-the-art maximum security facility located in Tecoluca, El Salvador. It was constructed as part of a government-led initiative to combat gang violence during a period when the country faced one of the highest homicide rates in the world. Designed to house tens of thousands of inmates, CECOT is often described as one of the largest prisons in the Western Hemisphere, both in terms of its physical size and inmate capacity. The prison's architecture reflects its purpose. Massive concrete walls, fortified perimeters, watchtowers, electrified fences, and high-tech surveillance systems all contribute to a highly controlled environment meant to contain some of the country's most notorious criminal elements. Officially, the facility targets members of violent gangs, particularly MS-13 and Barrio 18, who have historically exerted enormous influence over communities in El Salvador. The government frames CECOT as a critical part of its national security strategy, aiming to isolate gang leaders, dismantle organized crime networks from within, and reduce the pervasive fear that has long plagued the Salvadoran population. In practice, however, the prison represents more than just a containment strategy. It is a symbol of the state's approach to crime and punishment, embodying both the promises and controversies of a zero-tolerance policy that has drawn attention, scrutiny, and debate from international observers, human rights organizations, and journalists alike. CECOT Prison is home to a staggering number of inmates, primarily composed of members from El Salvador's most notorious gangs, including Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13, and Barrio 18, groups that have long been associated with violent crime, extortion, and territorial control. The facility was designed to centralize the incarceration of these high-risk individuals in one place, aiming to break down gang hierarchies and limit their influence outside prison walls. However, the sheer volume of inmates has created a situation of severe overcrowding. In some sections, it is not uncommon for 65 to 70 prisoners to be confined within a single cell, far exceeding the space that is considered humane or safe for human habitation. This overcrowding exacerbates tensions among inmates, as rival gang factions are forced into close quarters, often leading to confrontations, psychological stress, and a constant undercurrent of fear and aggression. The concentration of violent gang members in such confined spaces also creates enormous challenges for prison staff, who must maintain control while ensuring minimal incidents of violence. Overcrowding at CECOT reflects both the Salvadoran government's aggressive anti-gang policies, which have led to mass arrests, and the limits of infrastructure when facing such a concentrated population of high-risk detainees. Life inside CECOT Prison is marked by extreme hardship and deprivation, reflecting the institution's primary focus on containment rather than rehabilitation. Inmates are confined for the vast majority of the day, with reports indicating that many spend up to 23.5 hours in their cells, leaving them minimal opportunity for movement, exercise, or social interaction. The cells themselves are often cramped and sparsely furnished, with inadequate bedding and little personal space, which magnifies the psychological strain of incarceration. Basic amenities such as lighting and ventilation are heavily controlled, with lights kept on around the clock, preventing natural day-night cycles and disrupting normal sleep patterns, a factor that can contribute to heightened stress, anxiety, and long-term mental health issues. Nutritional provisions are also minimal, with prisoners typically receiving a monotonous diet of beans, rice, and bread, lacking sufficient protein, vitamins, or fresh produce to sustain overall health. Access to water and sanitation facilities is limited, further complicating daily life in the facility. These conditions are compounded by the constant presence of guards and the knowledge that rival gang members may be nearby, creating an environment of persistent tension and uncertainty. The prison structure, strict rules, and austere conditions reflect a philosophy of total isolation and strict control, aiming to break down gang cohesion and prevent coordination between rival groups. But in doing so, it also imposes profound physical and psychological hardships on every inmate. CECOT Prison is designed to be one of the most secure correctional facilities in the region, with an infrastructure and operational system that reflect the Salvadoran government's zero-tolerance approach to gang activity. The facility is surrounded by high concrete walls topped with barbed wire, reinforced gates, and electrified fencing, forming a nearly impenetrable perimeter that discourages escape attempts and limits unauthorized access. Watchtowers are strategically positioned throughout the compound, providing guards with unobstructed views of the prison grounds, enabling constant visual monitoring of both inmate behavior and interactions. Inside the prison, hundreds of surveillance cameras monitor every corridor, cell block, and common area, feeding into a centralized security system that allows for real-time observation and rapid response to incidents. Movement within the prison is strictly regulated. Prisoners are escorted between areas in small, controlled groups under the watchful eyes of armed personnel, ensuring that interactions between rival gangs or individual inmates remain highly supervised. The emphasis on security extends to daily routines, with strict protocols governing mealtimes, recreation, and any form of assembly, limiting the opportunities for inmates to communicate or coordinate. This combination of physical fortifications, technological surveillance, and regimented procedures is intended not only to prevent escapes, but also to suppress gang organization within the prison walls. It creates an environment where constant vigilance is necessary, both for the safety of the guards and for the maintenance of order among a population that has a long history of violence and territorial rivalry. Maintaining order within CECOT requires an extensive, disciplined, and highly coordinated security force. The prison is staffed by around 1,000 prison officers, supplemented by military personnel and riot control units, reflecting the extreme measures deemed necessary to manage a population composed almost entirely of high-risk gang members. These guards are tasked not only with routine supervision, but also with enforcing strict rules that govern every aspect of inmate life, from movement within the prison to access to food and sanitation. Their presence is constant and highly visible, with patrols conducted throughout the day and night to deter violent incidents and maintain the perception of absolute control. Guards are trained to respond to potential conflicts quickly and decisively, often employing force as a preventative measure, given the volatile mix of rival gangs confined together. The control exercised by the guards extends beyond physical oversight. They regulate communication, monitor interactions, and implement lockdowns when tensions rise, creating a system in which inmates are under nearly continuous surveillance and behavioral management. This environment demands a high level of vigilance, resilience, and psychological fortitude from the guards themselves, as they must navigate the dangers of working with individuals who have histories of extreme violence while ensuring that the prison remains functional and secure. The balance between enforcing order and preventing abuses becomes a central challenge, as the intensity of control can both deter gang activity and generate controversy over human rights and the treatment of detainees. CECOT Prison is primarily designed as a containment facility rather than a center for rehabilitation, and this is reflected in the complete absence of educational, vocational, or psychological support programs for inmates. Unlike correctional systems in some countries where rehabilitation and reintegration are central goals, CECOT focuses almost entirely on isolation and control, keeping inmates under strict confinement to minimize their influence on the outside world. Detainees spend the vast majority of their time confined to their cells, with no access to formal education, vocational training, or skill-building activities that could prepare them for life after release. There are no programs to address substance abuse, anger management, or trauma, issues that are common among gang-affiliated individuals and critical for meaningful rehabilitation. Mental health support is minimal or non-existent, despite the known psychological toll of prolonged isolation, overcrowding, and exposure to a high-stress environment filled with potential violence. Recreational activities, social interaction, or structured routines that could provide a sense of purpose or reduce tension are also absent. By focusing exclusively on containment, CECOT effectively suspends opportunities for personal development, rehabilitation, or the breaking of behavioral cycles that contribute to gang membership. While this approach may temporarily neutralize the immediate threat posed by gang members, it also raises profound questions about the long-term effectiveness of incarceration as a tool for reducing crime, as individuals released after years of confinement may leave the prison environment without the skills, support systems, or coping mechanisms necessary to reintegrate into society. One of the defining characteristics of CECOT Prison is the extreme level of isolation imposed on its inmates, which separates them almost entirely from family, friends, and broader society. Prisoners are generally denied visitation rights, meaning that family members and loved ones cannot see or interact with them, even during major holidays or personal milestones. Communication through phone calls or letters is highly restricted or, in many cases, entirely unavailable, further cutting off the inmates from the outside world. This isolation extends to legal support as well. Access to lawyers and legal counsel is extremely limited, making it difficult for detainees to challenge their confinement, appeal sentences, or participate meaningfully in their own defense. The combination of social and legal isolation creates a sense of total separation from normal life, leaving prisoners in an environment where the outside world feels increasingly distant and inaccessible. For gang members, who are often accustomed to tight-knit social networks, both inside and outside their communities, this enforced separation can exacerbate feelings of anxiety, helplessness, and vulnerability. The lack of contact also eliminates opportunities for inmates to receive guidance, mentorship, or rehabilitation support from external sources, which could otherwise help mitigate the negative psychological effects of prolonged incarceration. In essence, CECOT's approach to isolation is designed to neutralize external influence and communication, reinforcing the prison's role as a total containment facility where inmates exist in a near-complete vacuum of outside connection. CECOT Prison has been the subject of significant controversy, drawing attention from both national and international human rights organizations due to concerns over the treatment of inmates and adherence to basic legal standards. Critics argue that many detainees are held under conditions that may constitute cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, including extreme confinement, limited access to food and health care, and near total isolation from the outside world. Allegations have surfaced regarding arbitrary arrests, with some individuals reportedly detained for extended periods without formal charges or due process, raising serious questions about the fairness and transparency of the legal system. Human rights groups have highlighted that the facility's focus on containment rather than rehabilitation may exacerbate psychological trauma, particularly for inmates who may not be hardened criminals or who are caught up in the mass anti-gang operations. Reports of mistreatment, ranging from excessive use of force by guards to harsh disciplinary measures, have intensified scrutiny, suggesting that the environment within CECOT may foster not only physical harm, but also long-term mental health consequences. Additionally, the extreme concentration of rival gang members in confined spaces increases the potential for violence among inmates, which prison authorities may struggle to prevent despite strict security measures. These controversies underscore a broader debate about the balance between national security and human rights, as the Salvadoran government defends CECOT as a necessary tool to combat gang violence, while critics warn that such methods risk undermining legal protections, eroding due process, and creating conditions that could perpetuate cycles of violence rather than resolving them. CECOT Prison has drawn significant attention on the international stage, both for its scale and for the controversial methods employed in managing one of the world's largest concentrations of gang members. Media outlets, human rights organizations, and foreign governments have closely scrutinized the facility, raising questions about its compliance with international standard for the treatment of prisoners and the rule of law. Coverage often highlights the extreme conditions of confinement, the pervasive isolation of inmates, and the lack of access to legal representation, which many observers argue could violate basic human rights conventions. The prison has also gained international notoriety due to instances such as the deportation of foreign nationals, including individuals from the United States to CECOT, sparking debates about the responsibilities of sending and receiving governments in ensuring humane treatment. International NGOs have used CECOT as a case study to discuss the balance between aggressive anti-crime strategies and human rights protections, particularly in contexts where gang violence poses a serious threat to public safety. The facility's notoriety has made it a symbol of both the Salvadoran government's hardline approach to gang suppression and the potential risks associated with mass incarceration without rehabilitation or legal safeguards. This global attention has led to diplomatic conversations, investigative journalism, and policy analysis, all focusing on the broader implications of CECOT's operations for international human rights standards, criminal justice practices, and the ethical limits of state security measures. CECOT Prison embodies one of the most striking examples of the tension between the pursuit of security and the principles of justice, sparking intense debate both within El Salvador and internationally. On one hand, the Salvadoran government presents the facility as a necessary tool in the fight against gang violence, highlighting the dramatic reductions in homicide rates and the disruption of criminal networks as evidence of its effectiveness. By isolating gang leaders and influential members from society, authorities argue that the prison prevents coordination of criminal activities outside the walls, protects communities from extortion and violence, and asserts state control over areas long dominated by gangs. On the other hand, critics contend that the methods used at CECOT, prolonged isolation, overcrowding, limited access to legal counsel, and the absence of rehabilitation programs, may undermine the very principles of justice that a fair legal system is meant to uphold. Human rights organizations warn that the focus on containment rather than reform could entrench cycles of violence, leaving inmates ill-prepared to reintegrate into society upon eventual release. Moreover, the risk of arbitrary detention and abuse within the facility raises ethical questions about the balance between collective security and the rights of individuals, challenging the idea that security at any cost is acceptable in a democratic society. This ongoing debate is further complicated by the global spotlight on CECOT, as observers weigh the government's public safety achievements against allegations of human rights violations, ultimately raising fundamental questions about how far a state should go in prioritizing immediate security over long-term justice, rehabilitation, and adherence to the rule of law. In conclusion, CECOT Prison stands as both a symbol and a challenge, a place where the state's pursuit of security confronts the harsh realities of human rights, justice, and rehabilitation. It is a facility that has drastically changed the landscape of gang control in El Salvador, yet it also forces us to ask difficult questions about how societies balance safety with humanity. As we reflect on the stories within these walls, the lives of those confined, and the vigilance of those who guard them, we are reminded that true security cannot exist in isolation from justice. It is not enough to contain chaos. We must also strive to understand it, address its roots, and ensure that in the pursuit of order, we do not lose sight of the values that define a fair and humane society.